all in, everyone. It's awards in detail talk. I've been really looking forward to today's presentation, which is by Ben Addy of Moxon Architects. And it's going to 2024. And in particular, won the special category for architectural interiors. Now, the Architectural Interiors Award has been sponsored by Laurence McIntosh, and I'm delighted to introduce David MacDonald, who is the company director at Laurence McIntosh, the importance of interiors. So, David, over to you if you'd like to take the stand.
Thanks, Catriona, and thanks for inviting me on. Quick intro to Laurence McIntosh. We're a 78-year-old company based in Edinburgh, and we specialise in large interior joinery installations and furniture work, as well as principal contracting in and around Edinburgh. We're keen to promote this award as it showcases a lot of what can be done with close collaboration between architects and joinery contractors, and we're keen to promote closely with architects on projects and prospective projects that allows us to do what we enjoy doing. We're very excited about promoting this and continuing the support to RIAS for many years to come. So thank you very much and well done.
Thanks very much, David, for that. And thank you again for sponsoring this award. It's really important to the RIAS awards process that we have. Okay, everyone's on mute. We'd really like to encourage questions. If you have any questions, please can you pop them into the question and answer section. You'll find that if you put your cursor down at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A button. Press that and then it'll come up with a box and you can put some questions in. And Ben has very kindly said that he will take questions during and after. So anything burning, please just pop it in the chat box and I'll raise it. We're also going to be recording today's session. I hope that's okay for everyone so that people can watch it in the future. Right, okay, so I'm going to introduce Ben Addy. He doesn't need an introduction, director at Moxon Architects. Ben, you've done one of the most brave things that an architect can do. You have opened the door of your own house to a troop of judges and architects to come in. There's nothing more terrifying than that. We were very honoured and delighted to come and have a look around Ardoch. I think I'm not going to spoil your thunder by saying anything about the project other than the fact that it just unfolded beautifully as you took us through it. So I'm going to hand over to you, Ben. Take it away. Show us your beautiful slides.
Thank you very much, Catriona. Let me try and share my screen. I hope this works. We're having some technical difficulties earlier on, so hopefully that will work. Yes. Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and also, I suppose, I'm not sure if it was brave so much.
From one of the people online who said maybe we could talk a little bit about why Ardoch was set apart, why it was selected for the Interior Award. And I think obviously each of the judges had their own reasons for selecting this one. For me, it was the very modest, very considered a kind of an application of something on top of the original architectural idea. The project, and Ben will be the first person to tell you about this, is it evolved slowly. He did it in a series of stages, and as he did it, he worked very closely with craftsmen He had a very good joiner on board and an exceptional metal worker, craftsmen who've worked with Ben before. Between them, they developed details and resolved problems as they worked through. And the outcome, I think, is a series of very extraordinary interior details, which perhaps have benefited through kind of a slow maturing process. Definitely, this is an example of slow architecture. David, I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to add about your observations of the project.
It was very, very well considered, and it complemented the surroundings perfectly. I think that's what we're seeing more and more. There's more of an honesty coming into old buildings, more of a simplicity attributed to the joinery elements that are being required. I think the days of having ostentatious sort of embellishments on building are long gone. There's more of a considered approach to the surroundings and the fabric of the existing buildings. I think it's also important for our perspective as joiners to maintain a high level of craft whenever there's anything being done. We're working on various projects just now where there's a high element of reclamation and reuse of existing fabric in buildings, which is really exciting. It's not so exciting when you put a piece of timber through one of your planers and it's got a big nail in the middle, of course. But these are the things you have to work with. From looking at the project at Ardoch, I just feel there's been a lot of people spent a lot of heart and soul into the project, and that shows through.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think very much the character of the existing buildings was captured beautifully, and there wasn't a huge effort to straighten out and smooth out walls. There's quite an honest approach in one place, in one of the buildings. There's a kind of a big sort of exposed lump part of the wall projecting into the room, and it's just that honesty that is the original fabric, and it's been restored, and finished using a line render.
Oh gosh, right. Well, I've spent probably the last 10 minutes in that case talking about the history of the place and the remarkable people that lived at Ardoch before we moved there. It's a very special house. I don't want to reprise everything that I've just been talking about because we're now a bit pushed for time probably. Obviously it has incredible views. You've probably been looking at the first slide for the last 10 minutes with that view of Loch Nagar. But also it's had, like I say, a kind of remarkable history in terms of the human dimension. So probably the most famous previous inhabitant of the house is this gentleman here, Rob Bain, who is a hill farmer, a sheep farmer in the hills of Crathy and Gairnshiel for his entire life. He lived in the house with his mother, Jean Bain, who famously was the last native speaker of D-side Gaelic, which is a dialect of Gaelic that's thought to be extinct a century beforehand. But she was discovered, inverted commas, by Adam Watson in the 1980s. And you can see the screenshot from Weir's Way. There were several programs made about Rob and Jean during the 1980s. And as we've been living in the house and living on the site, as you might imagine, the history of the place kind of slowly kind of unfolds over the course of the years, both through the kind of discovering personal effects. We've got a kind of a box full of letters and all sorts, both from the Bains and the previous Juggids and various other people. And the entries were made in the 1980s interviews. And then off the back of all of this, there's that very much relied upon Jean and Rob in terms of explaining the kind of history of place names and the kind of human geography, if you like, of the area, with some really wonderful books by Ian Murray, who's a local historian in Ballater. Here's another photograph of the house with the one in the background. Obviously, you can't really escape the fact that the house looks down upon. Can you still see me?
Yes,
Was planted by the Queen's Garden. Is a lovely little poem that was written by the Scottish artist Alec Finlay. One cherry rains from 7 grafted. So that's been really, I suppose, the motivation from our part is, yes, the architecture, and yes, the craftsmanship, and yes, honouring the way in which these buildings sit on the site and how they've been developed over time is very important to us. But as much as that, it's about ensuring the future of these buildings for the next century or so. So before my camera stopped and the slideshow disappeared, I was talking about this building here, the farmhouse, which is the first building that we repaired and rejuvenated. And I think I'll sort of skip through that to get onto the more recent buildings where we're looking at architectural interiors in particular. Excuse me. So I think the two most recent buildings on the site are the one here highlighted in the red circle, and another just above it where my mouse cursor is respectively a guest house for friends and family, and then a greenhouse, which we'll come to in a moment. And I suppose the guest house really encapsulates the approach that we've taken throughout, and it's very much working with what's there and not imposing any kind of architectural any kind of concepts or ideologies that would kind of detract from the original fabric of the building. So it's a sort of sensitive repair in that sense, but working with the fabric, exposing the kind of the potential of these beautifully built structures. You can see this lovely photograph by Simon Kennedy, how we've taken the internal volume of that steading building, and we've simply repaired it to kind of expose like I say, the volume of the building. The original openings have all been retained, and we've simply put double glazed windows into those openings without any kind of fanfare. So it's retaining that kind of vernacular purity and honesty of the structure. And then the interior, although in these photographs you can see that it's very sort of controlled in the way in which the new components have been brought into the space, but actually this has evolved in just the same way as the overall approach to the other buildings on the site, which is very much organic, and it's taken place over the course of several years working with the joiners on site. David was talking about the importance of that kind of collaboration, and it's absolutely shot through in this project. This project could not have been done without Jachet and Waldemar Zappala, the two joiners that I've been working with here in Crathy since we worked on the 5 farms about a decade ago. So you can see the kind of the quality of the finishes and the design and the detailing of the joinery is something that has come about through collaboration and through discussions on a daily basis. There were very few drawings on this project, only the necessary drawings in order to kind of get the thing started. Everything has evolved through discussion and through kind of careful to and fro between ourselves and the joiners. And the same goes for the plasterers and the stonemasons. You can see here the roof structure or the floor structure above. You've got these kind of distinctive twinned joists. So although the structure is entirely new, it's a replacement of what was there before. What was particularly characteristic about this building was that you had these twinned joists because the timbers were so sort of slender. They had to be twinned up in order to support the loads. So we've kind of carried that detail through in the design of the new building. And you can see here at the hip how the ties kind of step up the geometry of the roof in that twinned fashion. the openings. So yeah, I mean the kind of the quality of the material, the quality of the space is something that's very much born of that discussion, born of collaboration. And really it's about, like I say, maintaining these buildings for the future. I suppose of all the buildings on the site, of which there are 8, and I could talk about each one, the most prominent in terms of a kind of overtly architectural approach would be the greenhouse, which is to the north of the site, as you can see circled here. And this building follows the footprint of a pre-existing barn or steading, but takes on a very different form. So it's the one building where we have kind of allowed ourselves to kind of take a different approach to what was there before. Because you can see in this photograph, what was there before was essentially a ruin, so completely collapsed. And there's some further photographs of it. So you can see these are the images from the day that we got the keys from Invercold Estate. And it was a bit of a conundrum actually for a while as to what we would do with this building. You can see the cross section through it here. The remnant retaining wall against the hillside, and then a little short part of the wall at the front edge, and then dotted there is the outline of what was once there, but it was sort of pile of rubble on the site. And it's only really through living on the site for 5 or 6 years before we decided what to do with it. But in retrospect, it seems kind of rather obvious. The hillside faces southwest, so you have the kind of almost the full track of the sun. Certainly in summer, you have the full track of the sun as it rises above the hillside behind, comes down into the top of this site. So the obvious thing to do, of course, is to build a greenhouse. You've got a retaining wall in granite, which is kind of insulated by Scotland, if you like, on the backside, but is a tremendous kind of thermal mass. We can put in a new floor between the 2 remnant parts of the structure and then simply enclose it with glass. If we then use that roof as a rainwater harvesting device, we actually suffer from, believe it or not, we suffer from droughts here in this part of the northeast of Scotland because you've got the cairngorms that kind of absorb a lot of the rainfall, and we're kind of in the rain shadow, if you like. So by using the building as a rainwater collector, we obviously have the potential for stack effect and ventilation, so passive ventilation through the structure. It's the ideal kind of greenhouse. It sort of designs itself, really. And so very much in the kind of vernacular sense, we have worked with the site, we've worked with the found elements of buildings and the kind of the topography of the site, and we've just sort of populated it with this building. And you can see there the various kind of details and the way in which the various components of this building, whether they were pre-existing or new, have come together. It's been brought together in a really kind of low-key and I suppose quite a delicate way, really. Certainly in terms of the way in which the exterior has been detailed and constructed. It's all about the kind of precision in the craft and the way in which the junctions have been resolved very precisely by the joiners. Some of my colleagues, when they visited from London, referred to it as a one-to-one scale model. So it's an architectural model writ large, because not only had we been developing the building whilst it was being constructed, so developing the design as you would with an architectural model, but also the kind of the precision of it in terms of the placement of screws and the exact coordination. So it has that kind of sense of being a kind of very precise but quite sort of low-key intervention. And then at the other end we have a kind of a gym at this part of the other end of the building outside of the greenhouse. And again, the quality of the joinery and what have you kind of shines through there. I mean, there are several other buildings on the site, like I mentioned, and it's kind of difficult to know when to sort of start and stop the story. But one other that I will sort of show is one which I built myself. So it's a self-build project on the site of what was actually the oldest building on the site. So the farmhouse was built in probably around about 1856 by the Dugard family, who were the first tenant farmers on this part of Invercold. But prior to that, there were farmers actually operating from we call it a black house. It isn't really a black house, but a very sort of small, would have had a thatched roof building to the rear of the site, probably in the most sort of sheltered part of the site. Now, when we moved there, this was just used as a midden. So this was full of pots and pans and old leather shoes and what have you. But the perimeter of the walls was still intact. So we had the idea that we would refurbish those walls just as they were, and then insert a new timber building into it. So you can see the various elements of this building on this slide, designed such that I would be able to make it myself. So you can see there's a Douglas fir frame, sort of heavy timber frame, and then there's a kind of monocoque roof that's sort of landed onto that. So it has inherent stiffness itself. And then the sharp-eyed amongst you will see that there's a wee pizza oven in there as well. So this is our dining room. So each of the buildings on the site has a kind of specific function. We sort of live between them. We move between the different buildings on a daily or hourly basis. There's a detail of the roof structure. And so we call it the black house. It is, like I say, it's not really a black house, but it has nevertheless this heavy turf roof, the granite walls. It's a superb place for drying wood, as you can see. And then the interior is something that, again, has been kind of developed in the way that we would develop an architectural model. So it's developed by hand, organically, learning from the process, learning from the interface between different structural components or the different materials, and then adapting and amending. So it's been built, like I say, by me, but in a very kind of organic fashion. And of course, we have dinner here quite frequently, actually, and you can spend an hour in here in winter, and it feels like you've been tucked away for a week. It's a really wonderful place to escape to. I suppose the final little bit that I'll show you, if I scroll down here, is just up in the woods from the Black House. There's another kind of fragment of building. It's got this really sort of wonderful feeling to it because you're going up into this woodland, the triple SI of Crathy Wood. You can see the pathway in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide there, and that leads you up to this fireplace. So this chimney was yet another building on the site, so the 8th building on the site, which was at one time, I think I may have mentioned the Queen's seamstress, who used to live here, and she used to live in this building, or rather a timber shack that was arranged around this fireplace. Now the shack was a kind of a pile of timber by the time, or rotting timber by the time we moved there, but we've kind of rebuilt the perimeter here. Stuart Urquhart, stonemason, has rebuilt this perimeter with stones from the hillside behind. So we've kind of reinstated or left a memory of the place. And again, it's a wonderful place to sort of while away an evening in the woods here. So apologies, this was probably quite disjointed, not least because of the mishap earlier on with the technology. But I think the point that I want to sort of reinforce is that these buildings have been repaired and rejuvenated and brought forward for the next sort of century or so through a process of kind of piecemeal repair and kind of organic development of the design, often using the building, like I say, as a one-to-one model. And I think the thing that we always come back to is the fact that we are just sort of passing through and sort of passing these buildings on to whoever knows in the future. And I suppose we were asked recently who we'd most like to have come round for dinner, and I think the answer would be the previous inhabitants of this house, whether it's the Baines or the Duguids or the Queen's seamstress or whoever, to see what they make of it, I suppose. Thank you very much.
Ben, thank you so much. David and I were talking whilst we had our outage at the beginning a little bit about the craftsmen that were involved in the project, and just to make sure that we fully do justice to all of the work that you've done here, might you be able to tell us a little bit about the metalwork and in the studio? You haven't talked much about the studio where Naomi works. If there's maybe just a couple, so that you can talk about that, because that really is exquisite.
So I'm just trying to find. I don't know. Embarrassing. I'm not sure if I've got any slides of that. Let me see if I can.
No problem.
So, I mean, yeah, I mean, you're quite right. I mean, there've been, I'd say there's sort of 5 or 6 people involved with the project who've been involved with the project consistently since the start. So there's been my brother who worked on the original farmhouse sort of back in 2011, 2012. And then there have been the steel worker you mentioned, Craig Monteith, who has been involved in the project right the way through, and from the steel frame that you can see in this building and the various details. Again, it's been worked on through kind of that kind of collaboration with barely a drawing, but tons and tons of sketches. A good example, I'll try and zoom in, would be these light fittings, which, hopefully you can see in the top of the slide there, where you can see there's a steel rod, obviously. There's a G clamp, which is welded to that rod. And then there's the kind of the fitting on the end, and there's a little thumb turn screw. So that the kind of the detail of fabricating that lamp, because obviously the idea is that we can remove it, we can place it somewhere else in the building using the G clamp, which is a lovely sort of process of design for a lovely end. And that has come about purely through that sort of discussion process. I can't claim authorship of this building particularly. It has had several authors, and again, that's the sort of, I suppose, these discussions. Stonemason's the same, and the joiners, obviously.
That's a very honest admission, but I think comes hand in hand with this working closely with the craftsmen that you have been doing over the last 10 years or so. There's a question in the question and answer. Are there any images of the farmhouse? And I think that you had your beautiful the library space. Maybe it's worthwhile just sharing 1 or 2 of those images if you might be able to.
Sure, yeah. So I did actually, I probably spent several minutes talking to myself about the farmhouse. So you can see, I don't know if I showed this in the second time round, but here's an exterior photograph of the farmhouse, and you can see it's the sort of classic Aberdeenshire or Highlands button ben, 2 up, 2 down, 1.5 story building. So it's classic in that sense, although what is really unusual about this building is the precision with which it's been made. So the stonemasonry is absolutely perfect. The front elevation is, I think, millimeter perfect in terms of its symmetry about the center line of the front door. The windows and the coins at the side are exactly symmetrical across this building, which is really remarkable and quite unusual. You mentioned the bookshelf, Catriona. So yeah, in the living room, we've kind of the building is basically a reinstatement of what was there before, with a few additional things. So the bookshelf here is new, but otherwise, as you go up through the building, the finishes, the matchboarding that you can see, it's a bit out of focus here, but the matchboarding in the photograph here is a reinstatement of what was there before. The handrail is a perfect replica in ash this time of the handrail that we found on the building. This was made by my dad actually on Mull. Brought it across in his Land Rover. And then the kitchen area, you can see this sort of stunning fireplace with a 2-point-something meter long lintel. This was all hidden by matchboarding when we got the place. But as you peel away the layers, you find the way in which different people in the past had lived in the building. And this was one of those special moments.
Yeah, there's a question that's come into the chat that kind of acknowledges the process of resolving and refining the details. It is a very kind of full and ongoing process. As a result of that, do you think that you needed a lot more flexibility with time and budget? If you were to do it again, if you were to do it with a client, for instance, how might you advise them in terms of program and cost?
So I think that's a brilliant question, and in a way that highlights another kind of peculiarity with the project, which also makes it very hard for me as an architect in a professional sense to grapple with it. There's several parts to the project, obviously, that make it very hard to kind of pull it all together. But yes, in terms of how you might approach it with a client, it would be very difficult. I think it'd be almost impossible to take this project on in the way that we have with a client, with a third-party client, because it has evolved so much over time. I mean, a very good example of that would be in the guest house, where there's a gable which points directly down the glen, has the most incredible view, except there are no windows in that gable. And originally, I had this sort of architect idea that I would put a great big opening in the gable with a kind of a glass box that projects out into the view. And Naomi, my wife, said she always resisted it, but quite subtly, knowing that by the time we actually got to site, she'd be able to get rid of that idea very simply. And she did, and thank goodness. So that building doesn't have any new openings in it. And it was obviously completely the right decision to work with the building as found. And I think that if you're working with a client and you take those initial decisions and you do it in the sort of correct time frame for the project, you might end up, as I say, not with the best result. So I think it's been very necessary for us to kind of evolve everything over time. I don't know how you would achieve that with a client. You'd need a very, very patient client.
And possibly a very big budget, or a very long spread out budget.
A very long spread out budget. That's what I'd say. Yeah.
Now, there's another really interesting question here about the external spaces, because you mentioned that you move between the buildings, you go from one building to the other, and Col has said that it's almost as if you have a garden hallway. Do you find that each space takes on a unique function depending on the seasons throughout the year? So are your habits different throughout the year?
Well, absolutely. So we don't really distinguish we don't we also being buildings in the bottom. It's not a full by any means. That's the kind of that we have. And you count that it's made of little spaces. They've all evolved in terms of plants produce kind of sequence of external rooms, and yes, you're quite right. They're kind of connected by their own little hallways, and likewise the buildings in the same way. So I mean, I think it's a very good observation. That is very much how we live in the place. In terms of the seasonality of it, surprisingly, I mean, I think we use all the buildings equally throughout the year, actually. Yeah, they take on different feelings. The Black House, for instance, will have it completely buttoned up in winter, but in summer the windows are wide open the whole time. And I suppose the greenhouse is a really lovely place in autumn when it's grey and cold. You can be in there and it's warm and green.
A question that I wanted to ask, and this is a really good slide to have it, is you've resisted the temptation to do a kind of a sort of statement covered outside space. But I'm thinking that perhaps the reason for that is in your explanation about the particular weather situation here, and that it actually is very strangely a very dry part of Scotland. But did you ever think about having covered outside space where you park the car, where you sort your bikes out, whatever? Or is that perhaps phase 9 of this project?
Well, no, I think we're finished now. I mean, it's interesting. We have a covered space at the studio down here at the bottom of the hill, which is a really well used space for all the reasons that you kind of mentioned there. We do have a kind of covered space at the front of the greenhouse, and then I think, like I say, the Black House is kind of external. When the shutters on the front are all opened up, it is legitimately. So if you imagine this photo with these shutters all wide open, it's legitimately an external room, if you like. But no, I think, as you say, the climate is interesting here. It's the coldest place, and it's the warmest place. It's the driest place as well. So it's the most kind of continental part of Scotland. So it's the highest up and the most far inland. So you have kind of some.
Thanks for describing that, Ben. So we don't have any other questions in the question box just now. So I'll just put a kind of a final reminder out. If anyone has got a question that they'd like to ask Ben, please pop it in the chat now, and I will ask it on your behalf. If there's any slides that you'd like Ben to share again, please just ask for that. And I should invite David. David, if you have any questions for Ben, is there anything you'd like to ask?
I think you've done a fantastic job, Ben. I really do. I love the greenhouse, especially. I've spent all my days in there if I could. A lot of the timber, was it locally sourced?
Yes. So on the greenhouse, for instance, the wood is all excuse me, Douglas fir, and it comes from the Forres, Logie timber in Forres. Right. So it's very much from the northeast of Scotland. I don't know exactly where, but it's local. And then actually the timber in the steading, in the guest house, sadly isn't local. I don't know where the softwood comes from. It came from Jewson's, if I'm perfectly honest. And then the oak is all French oak, actually. So that's all imported. But I think, there are various things that we would do. Again, there always is on a project. And I think having got to grips with the way in which Jack and Waldy and myself kind of worked on the detailing, we probably look to use more Scottish material, I think.
Well, it's not a criticism, believe me. I know how difficult it is.
It's very difficult.
You have to go further afield. It looks just great. The finishes on your roof, the rafters, what are they? The trusses, sorry.
So yeah, I mean that again is the sort of beauty of working things through on site. So that wood is just your regular C16 and C24 structural timber. So it has that kind of yellow preservative finish that it turns up with. And rather than use kind of more expensive timber that we'd leave exposed, we brushed that timber with a wire brush, and then we gave it 2 coats of graphite grey Osmo oil and rubbed it back between the coats. So it almost of the timber that was there originally through that process.
Works very well.
Ben, we've got one last question here. Now that you've come to the end of the whole project, is there anything with hindsight that you would have done differently?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. Because I think the beauty of the project for us is that it took so long, and like I say, I keep talking about it evolving, but it did. So we kind of have lived it during the making as well as now it's complete, living in it. And so much of it was born of how we were living in it at the time, and it's a kind of a continuation of that. It's very hard to describe, but I think it's the closest I'll get in my career probably to a truly vernacular way of building. And I think that suits the site incredibly well. It suits the buildings incredibly well. And although this building here, for instance, is no longer a kind of cattle barn, I think that the ethos of the way in which the building was built in the first place has very much been brought through into its new use.
Ben, we've had a technical question raised by Nick, and it's all about the green roof. So presumably that's, I think what he's meaning is the roof on the dining bothy.
Oh, yeah.
How is it constructed and drained? And if you're really honest, is it actually working?
So it's, I'll show you the construction drawing. So you can see here, this is the framing of the roof, which is again C24 and some plywood gussets at the ridge there. So I cut all these gussets from a template with a jigsaw and then screwed them all together. So the entire frame is kind of self-contained, if you like. It's then skinned with plywood on the top and then softwood tongue and groove on the bottom. So it is a kind of a rigid drum that then sits on top of the Douglas fir frame that you can see here. So it's a kind of a curious structure in a way, because you've got this roof sitting like a top hat, if you like, onto the kind of trabeated structure of the Douglas fir. So it's peculiar in that sense. You could have actually mounted it on a much lighter structure because that roof is sort of a diaphragm. Does it work? In terms of the green roof, it absolutely works. So you can just about make out in this photograph these little black downpipes projecting through. So these only really come into play when it's really, really pouring down with rain, because actually the turf and the kind of the retaining layers underneath the turf absorb a lot of water. I mean, the roof is kind of green in the spring and summer, and then it's sort of brown in winter and autumn, but it's got a life of its own. There's all sorts of interesting things growing on this roof because, of course, the roe deer can't get up onto it. So yeah, we're finding all sorts of beautiful wildflowers and succulents and all sorts of things growing on here that otherwise would be browsed. So yeah, I mean, it works. Technically, it keeps the rain out. It's not fallen down yet, and it's quite a lush kind of environment. It's a great place for sunbathing, actually. You climb onto the roof and you can lie there all day.
That's a great solution for biodiversity, to create a roof that the deer can't get onto. Lovely. Well, I don't think we have any other questions for you, so I think it's just leaves it with me to say thank you very much for taking the time to run through your project. It is exquisite, and again, I'll say it again, it's very brave to open up the doors of your own house and share that with the scrutiny of the audience that we have. So yeah, lovely that you've done that, and thank you also to David at Laurence McIntosh for sponsoring this award and for collaborating so positively with the RIAS. Really very grateful for that, and thank you to everyone who's dialed in. We've had 75 people online. Huge apologies for the technical issues. Zoom hasn't been helping us today, but thank you for being with us, and hope you agree that it's been a really exquisite talk, and thank you, Ben, for your time. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.